Hello, Heath Jones here from Northwood Christian Church, and if you're watching this, you probably know that I've been recording these videos for some time now, throughout the course of the pandemic, basically. This being said, if you're watching this and you don't come to our main service or you don't check in through the live stream, I'd love to hear from you to get to know you better. I want to know who you are, who is watching and showing up as the viewer count underneath these videos. And so if you'd like to reach out, just reply in the comments, or you can look us up at indyncc.org. That's www.indyncc.org. That being said, our scripture reading to begin with is found in the second chapter of the Gospel of Matthew, and we'll be reading from the first 12 verses, and it goes. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem, in the territory of Judea, during the rule of King Herod, Magi came from the east to Jerusalem. They asked, "Where is the newborn king of the Jews? We have seen his star in the east, and we've come to honor him." When King Herod heard this, he was troubled, and everyone in Jerusalem was troubled with him. He gathered all the chief priests and the legal experts and asked them where the Christ was to be born. They said, "In Bethlehem of Judea." For this is what the prophet wrote, "You, Bethlehem, land of Judah, by no means are you least among the rulers of Judah, because from you will come one who governs, who will shepherd my people." Then Herod secretly called for the Magi and found out from them the time when the star had first appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search carefully for the child. When you have found him, report to me so that I too may go and honor him." When they heard the king, they went, and look, the star they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stood over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were filled with joy. They entered the house and saw the child with Mary, his mother. Falling to their knees, they honored him. Then they opened their treasure chests and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Because they were warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they went back to their own country by another route. This is the suggested reading for the Feast of Epiphany. An epiphany, it's a funny word. Have you ever had one, I'm wondering? If you haven't, you should try it. It's the moment when your eyes are open so that you can see something that you maybe didn't see before. It comes just after Christmas, during the first week of January, this Feast of Epiphany, and it's celebrated sometimes the Sunday after the Feast of Epiphany. And today's story is meant to open our eyes, to bring us into our own awakening, an eye-opening to the sometimes covered-up truths about Jesus, covered up by systems of power that benefit by the cover-up, or perhaps even our own benefiting from what we hide from, the truth about ourselves we'd rather not see, the truths about God we'd rather not see. Enter the Magi, looking for something true, looking for an epiphany in their own right. It's a funny word, Magi. It's nearly a transliteration of the original word magoi, which is helpful if we are trying to learn more about these persons. How was this word used in antiquity? We can learn who they were and where they came from by way of this word. And this word was the word given to priests/scholars/magicians from the Persian Empire. So think of these fellas as a group of learned persons from Persia's priestly class. The fact that they are said to have come from the east is another clue as to their origin. For to the east lies Persia, or modern-day Iran. Zoroastrianism was Persia's ancient religion, the religion in those days. And their priests, or magi, were persons who were possessors of ancient wisdom. They would study their old stories, they would dream dreams and then interpret dreams, and they would carefully attend to the stars. for astrology was integrated into their belief system. Signs and wonders in the stars. So it's no wonder that they had their eyes peeled to the sky, watching for important omens. After all, they held a belief that by watching the signs in the sky, a magi might be able to predict the arrival of a new prophet or some other important person. So make of that what you will, but this helps us understand why these foreigners of a different tribe and faith are wandering cross-country in search of a miraculous birth. I think that this alludes to what is becoming, for me, a deep conviction. That is, I think the story of the Magi and their search alludes to the universal appeal of God's light. We try to bottle it up and keep it channeling through our own belief systems, our own stories, our own words. But I think that knowledge of God runs wild throughout time and space, and people like the Magi are evidence of this. You see, in their story, we see that the light is not possessed by any one people. It's for all. The Magi saw it, and they followed. But what did they see when they got there? Well, as we read the story, we discern that apparently it wasn't a direct route. The way was meandering. And apparently they lost track of the star. I wonder if it's coincidental that in our story, the losing sight of the star seems to coincide with their meet up with Herod. I think there's something in that. And you know about Herod. There's a peach. We've been talking about him quite a bit of late. He weaves in and out of the Christmas narrative. Herod was a despotic ruler who was put in place by the Caesar of Rome. In fact, Augustus gave him an honorific title. Get this? The King of the Jews. Should sound familiar. Some call him Herod the Great. Other historians call him Herod the Builder. In the verses that follow today's passage, we find him to be something like Herod the Butcher. In the verses after verse 12, we read about how this Herod, in a fit of paranoia and cruelty, has every child in Bethlehem and the surrounding countryside under the age of 2 killed in an attempt to kill the child who he perceived to be a threat to his power. This new and usurping king of the Jews that the Magi were looking for is a threat to him. Now, the Gospel of Matthew is the only ancient document that records this event, this slaughtering of the innocents as it's called. But other historical accounts about Herod's life help us discern that this is the sort of behavior that seems to fit with his character. Anyway, the Magi lose sight of the light, and then they meet up with Herod. And as I said before, I think there's a connection there. When Herod learns of their mission, he is troubled. He's threatened. I say that he was troubled, but that's putting things mildly. The Herods of the world are reflexive, reactive, and often exceedingly prone to agitation. Herod is no exception, and he, at this point, consults his confidants, and they are as troubled as he is, it would seem, probably because their own status and privilege is contingent on Herod's rule. This is why sycophants fall in line so readily, defending the indefensible, aiding and abetting oppression in every age. Either way, Herod comes back from his consultation and tells the Magi that he would like to hear back from the Magi after they found the Christ. He says, so that I may too honor him. Likely story. And you know from the onset that this is not what he's playing at. He wants this new would-be Messiah, he interprets as usurper, dead. And one may wonder, what did Herod think they'd find when they got there, when they actually found him? And we can probably form an image by considering Herod's conception of power. If this child is to be a king, as Herod conceptualizes king, he must be from kingly lineage, from the house of David. In fact, that's what the prophets say. Now that is a house to consider, the house of David. David was a king among kings, but remember, David was born of shepherds. humble origins. Not so in Herod's conception. Power begets power. Lowly begets lowly in Herod's world. Herod knew that his own lineage, to be sure, was kingly, very kingly. He was connected. He has resources. He has control of many people. And Herod is afraid that the Christ will be a child born in his image, only perhaps a little more powerful. So he's afraid. He must shut the whole thing down. Well, I wonder, what did the Magi think they'd find when they got there? We can probably form an image by considering the gifts that they brought. The text reads that they retrieved these gifts from treasure chests. They brought them out of treasure chests into the Christ child. And first there's gold. And you already know all about gold, the finest and most pricey of metals. Kings keep gold, they hoard gold, and then they give gold to those they respect or are beholden to. Frankincense was a costly spice. It comes from the sap of a tree that grows in a very hard to reach place. It's known for its capacity to survive unforgiving environments. So very costly, very rare. Then last there's myrrh, which was a costly perfume. And each of these gifts were extravagant and fit for a king as Herod conceptualizes kings. And these are the kind of gifts that the likes of Herod might appreciate. And so that's probably the idea of king that the Magi bring to this encounter. All this to say, the Magi think they're going to find maybe a better Herod. But what they found would be a surprise to mostly anyone. I like the part of the text that reads, "When they heard the king, they went. And look, the star they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stood over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were filled with joy." So this sequence of events is intriguing to me, and I think it teaches us something. They arrive at Herod's, they lose the light. They leave Herod and they find the light again. They leave the presence of one form of power, a place where they had momentarily lost the light, and now they've found it again. And when they saw the star, when they find it again, they were filled with joy, and their perception begins to shift. So at this point, you'll have to jettison many of the popular images that have been created here to depict this scene. And I'm thinking of those classic nativity scenes, the ones that I put up in my own house around Christmas time. We picture the Magi approaching a manger alongside the shepherds, and the whole while angels are singing somewhere above in the sky, and you can see the glow from inside the stable. It's so bright, and it's very bright in the way that we depict it. But the thing is, barns are not bright places at night. But the light crescendos in our classic nativity scenes, along with the music as the three wise men approach the manger, brighter than brighter. I hate to break it to you, this was not the case. Read the story. The Magi, a group of unknown number, we often say three, we don't know how many there were, approach the home of Mary, Joseph, and Jesus a couple years after he was born. So at this point, Jesus is a small boy, probably about 2 years old, not in a manger, but in a humble home. They follow the star to his house. They knock, and I imagine they entered, and behold, a toddler. I didn't know that it was supposed to be a toddler. I have a few at home myself. What good is that? Snot-nosed, always breaking stuff. Nothing much to look at unless you like that sort of thing. But this is what they found. And I submit to you that it's still that way. Many are born in unassuming places in dire times. Many surprising heroes arise from such circumstances. Herod looks on and shrugs, muttering to himself, I don't get it. He's the kind of guy who'd watch any of the good movies where the unlikely David comes up against the giant, and Herod assumes the giant always wins because that's how he always seems to get what he wants. He watches the boy collect the stones from a river and he scoffs. What is this nonsense? He cannot believe that David can beat the giant. Or Moses comes at Pharaoh with nothing but a walking stick, and somehow in the stories about God and God's people, it works. If Herod had gone with the Magi, he'd have held the baby and said, "Is this it, really? I've produced offspring that could wail on this child. My own son could beat him down." But this is not what the Magi found there. Not what Herod expected, not what they expected. They entered the house and saw the child with Mary, his mother. And they fall on their knees and honor this normal but extraordinary boy. Epiphany. Their eyes were open to a new reality. Actually, it was an old reality, but it was new to them. Their eyes were open to the ways of God, the God Jesus would describe again and again through parables and sayings, a God who defies our expectations and assumptions about what power looks like and about what winning looks like. Jesus would not, it turns out Herod at his own game, or out Rome at their own game. He would not bring down the empire in that way. God instead would lift up the lowly, raise up a poor peasant to spark renewal in the land. Here in this story, the Magi join in the exaltation of the lowly. They bring Jesus kingly gifts, and in so doing acknowledge that the Christ has arrived in the most unlikely of shapes. I say today, it's time for us to join them. We too should give our treasures to the cause. We too should lay down our value systems at the feet of the one who does not value gold or any other item the Herods of the world have possessed, thinking that by possessing them they hold the world in their hands. They do not hold the world in their hands. The mother who holds the child is holding the world in her hands. The toddler in his mother's arms is the answer, peaceful and as powerless as anyone else who gave their life for the life of the world, for the love of the world. And here it is, the Epiphany. Our eyes are opened to the ways of God. So put down your weapons, your cunning diplomacy, and your riches that fade like anything else. It's time for us to join in the work of Jesus, to help modern Herods, those who claim to hold power in our own time. It's time for us to help them see what we have seen. That the path the Christ child would walk when he grew is the way to life. That in fact, our modern conceptions of power and status are all wrong. Christ came from the poor, those we think of as disconnected. Jesus came from the very sort of community that many would patronize, many of us patronize, thinking we possess more. And many would view Jesus' household as a charity case, but from that home arose the servant of all, but also a Savior. The Magi saw it, Epiphany, and somehow they knew that in this humble home lived the one through whom God would be revealed. This is the sort of epiphany we can hardly hope for these days, it would seem, as we are so enthralled and captivated by consumerism and our own misconceptions about how real power works. But this is the sort of eye-opening experience we desperately need. And the Bible is filled with stories about God calling up saints from the margins. Shepherds become kings, barren widows become matriarchs. Voices crying in the wilderness are finally listened to. It's time for us to open our eyes to the voice of Jesus Christ calling us today from the margins, from poor communities, from disenfranchised communities, from those places that we disregard as unimportant, as superfluous. After all, many have said, it is written in the Gospel of John, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" asked the would-be disciple in response to the call, to which the answer came from another disciple who had answered the call, "Come and see." Can anything good come from the backwater town? Come and see. Can anything good come from the poor places we overlook today? Here is the Epiphany. here is what we must come to see. The answer to the question is yes. To the question, can anything good come from the slums, the poor communities, the poor households, and the least and the last among us? The answer is, has been, and will continue to be yes. It is precisely in those places where we will find Jesus hard at work, transforming our world. Here is how the Apostle Paul put it in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 26 through 29, and I'll conclude with these words. He would write, "Consider your own call, brothers and sisters. Not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many were powerful. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, things that are not, to reduce to nothing things that are, so that no one might boast in the presence of God."